All forms of corruption, both in the public and private sector. Mogoeng delivered the keynote speech at the annual Nat Nakasa Awards for Media Integrity on Saturday night.
Ladies and gentlemen, I greet you. I think it is best that I make introductory remarks that I never meant to make. I have deliberately decided to say very little about media freedom in South Africa because I'm confident that the kind of freedom our media enjoys, as enshrined in Section 16 of our Constitution, is unparalleled throughout the continent, and I dare say compares only to the maturest of constitutional democracies around the world. You will, from time to time, encounter unpleasant incidents. That's inevitable. It happens to the judiciary, it happens to everybody else. I saw what happened in Mahikeng. I saw what happened, is it a year or two ago, to Vuyam Voko. There are a number of disturbing incidents, and there will be going forward. But by and large, I think you really have to celebrate the wisdom of the founding fathers and mothers of our constitutional democracy who made sure that we have the kind of media freedom, freedom of the press that our media does enjoy. I just need to also celebrate and express my profound gratitude to the likes of Nat Nakasa, Hesi Kobosa, Joe Tlolwe, Joe Latakhomo. It's very difficult to imagine where we would be as a nation had it not been for the bravery and commitment to a calling by journalists of that caliber, who were prepared to even lay their lives down, if need be, just so that the truth is unearthed, abuse of power is exposed, and people are reminded of their responsibility to account for whatever it is they do. I'll tell you why I'm not going to say much about the good work that you have done. One of the people that I respect the most had this story to share. He says, as a young pupil and ultimately as a student, his teachers just never used to give him credit for a job well done. He remembers in particular his mathematics teacher. So at some stage he scored just over 70, he and his friends, and they were expecting some congratulatory remarks from the teacher, but he said nothing. They worked hard and scored 80, nothing. Ultimately they got 100%, and they were confident that they were going to be praised, but nothing was forthcoming. And they were daring enough to say to the teacher, why is it that even after scoring 100%, you haven't said anything to encourage us? Said, yeah, you are here. Your mates are at university now. You shouldn't be too proud of getting 100% at this level. That absence of congratulatory remarks pushed them so hard. One ended up being a PhD graduate on applied mathematics. Only then did his maths teacher begin to congratulate him. So I say to you, you've done so well. But there is so much more that still needs to be done by the media of this country, not just for the benefit of South Africa, but for the benefit of the whole continent and humanity. So I deliberately want to limit the extent to which I'm impressed by the good work that you have done, the bravery you have displayed, and the most you have made of the freedom that you enjoy, so that I can challenge you as I'm about to do. I think with the same vigor, courage, and creativity you have displayed so far, you need to identify other national destiny-defining powers that must be urgently exposed and held to account. When we say the importance of courageous and free media in exposing and holding power to account, what exactly do we have in mind? Important to who? Courage against who? Is it selective or all-inclusive? Free from what? Which power immediately dawns on your mind or registers in your mind when the word power is mentioned? From where I stand, there are far too many factors at play in determining who to expose and hold accountable, what real benefit, if any, that exercise is likely to yield, and to whom. The power to be exposed or held accountable seems to occupy center stage in the topic I've been asked to address. And I must say that that power is context or situation specific. The context and setting in addressing this issue properly differs from country to country and from moment in history to moment in history. Therefore, the superficiality now invoked and its enabling narratives that the past be ignored and focus should only be on the post-independence era when talking about power or the challenges of our times is not only disingenuous and overly protectionist, but also a threat to finding enduring solutions to problems that plague South Africa, Africa, and the rest of the developing world. No wonder we're still trying to grapple with matters in relation to which we should already have made a lot of progress. It is essential to trace powers historically and currently at play in entrenching the poverty, indignity, dispossession, disunity of the African people and the perpetuation of their dependencies and the corruption of some of those who govern. Which power needs to be exposed or held accountable in South Africa and the rest of Africa? For indigents to derive optimum benefit from that exercise. In other words, what are the crucial or urgent challenges that confront South Africans and Africans whose resolution could be paralyzed by the lack of courage or freedom by the media to expose or hold accountable any power that could but doesn't want to bring about the necessary change? It appears that there are powerful forces behind the major problems that have plagued and continue to plague South Africa, Africa and the rest of the developing world over the years. Poor governance, racial and gender discrimination, wealth disparities along racial lines, virtual landlessness and control of the economy, and lack of meaningful participation by the previously disadvantaged are but some of those important challenges that require serious and urgent attention. The power behind them also needs a courageous and free media to expose and hold accountable. But these problems will forever be synonymous to South Africa and Africa as long as we all resign ourselves to being superficial in grappling with them or choose to know or confine ourselves to our place in dealing with these issues. To be truly effective in exposing and holding all real powers accountable, we must seek to know those powers, what sustains them, and why they may never let go. I again begin, as I recently often do, with the loaded words of Lord Macaulay on the 2nd of February 1835, while he was addressing the British Parliament. He said, open quotes, "I've traveled across the length and breadth of Africa, and I've not seen one person who is a beggar, who is a thief. Such wealth I have seen in this country," meaning Africa, "such high moral values, people of such caliber, that I do not think we would ever conquer this country unless we break the very backbone of this nation," meaning Africa, "which is her spiritual and cultural heritage, and therefore I propose that we replace her old and ancient education system, her culture. For if the Africans think that all that is foreign and English is good and greater than their own, they will lose their self-esteem, their native culture, and they will become what we want them, a truly dominated nation," close quote. So, the much talked about poverty, unemployment, and inequality did not just happen. The contentment, abundant supplies of the needs of the African people, their cultural and educational heritage, was deliberately destroyed by a colonial power to entrench poverty, unemployment, and inequality. Crime and corruption, according to Lord Macaulay, was virtually non-existent. There was no theft, he said. The high moral values upheld and the caliber of the people of Africa struck him as being so essential to the sufficiency or prosperity, morality, peace, and virtual absence of crime, that it all had to be destroyed to reduce the people to the level of poverty, helplessness, criminality, and absolute dependency that they have been brought down to over the years. The very backbone of their being and success had to be broken. The very backbone of their being, I beg your pardon, I've read that one. Otherwise, Africa would never have been as poor, run down, and despised as it is. Lord Macaulay said Africans had to be made what colonial powers wanted them to be, people of low self-esteem, a truly defeated people who believed that everything about them was inferior and everything English and foreign was best and superior. African people had to be and were reduced to a defeated people, beggars for foreign aid or favor from those who shamelessly took their wealth to enrich themselves. Well over 100 years later, while addressing the Ghana National Assembly on 8th August 1960, President Kwame Nkrumah, often referred to as Osage Yefo, said the following about the continuous struggle in Congo. And let me pause to say, in case what I've said so far and what I'm going to say before I get to the point may lead you to the, has he forgotten what the topic is about? I haven't. Just be patient. Open quotes. The evil balkanization, disunity, and secessions, in that the new Balkan states of Africa will not have the independence to shake off the economic shackles, which result in Africa being a source of riches to the outside world, while grinding poverty continues at home. There is a real danger that colonial powers will grant a nominal type of political independence to individual small units so as to ensure that the same old colonial type of economic organization continues long after independence has been achieved, close quote. President Nkrumah also said, I quote, "My purpose for writing Neocolonialism was to expose the workings of international monopoly capitalism in Africa in order to show the meaninglessness of political freedom without economic independence and to demonstrate the urgent need for the unification of Africa and the socialist transformation of society," close quote. And after a breathtaking description of the African landscape, her waterfalls, rivers, as well as the fauna and flora, Lauren Cunningham goes on to share the following sobering and painful realities. Open quotes. "Our great artist God has displayed these and other wonders in Africa. He hid more gold here, more diamonds, plutonium, and copper than in any other place on earth. Africa has more hydroelectric potential than all the rest of the world put together, as well as an abundance of coal and oil, wisely used by and for Africans. The continent's resources could contribute significantly to the new health and prosperity. Unfortunately, for too long, Africa's people have been enslaved, raped, abused, dismissed by prejudice, hatred, or just ignored. Their rich resources have often been collected and used by others, even stolen, with little, if any, benefit going to Africans. Instead, their value has attracted foreign exploitation, enriching dictators and warlords, bringing bloodshed, starvation, and even modern forms of black-on-black slavery, close quote. So far it looks like those who took unconscionable advantage of the riches of Africa at the expense of the African people just never lost the appetite for enriching themselves and watching African people as they suffered and died under poverty, ill health, and all the confusion and downtroddenness that now seem to characterize Africa. Because Lauren Cunningham wrote his book, at least I'm reading from the 2007 edition. But now listen to the latest, 2018, so that you can contextualize the challenge I'm about to throw to you. Is that not where African people are right now? Why, when Africa is so well endowed with the resources that are necessary to remove Africa from this state of squalor and dependency, is this happening? I say so because there are incredibly powerful forces, apparently, that have brought about this state of affairs and have never really been dislodged or held to account. They seem to have a near-perfect plan to stay on and keep their position of dominance unshaken and intact. It appears that it will take more courage by our free media to expose and hold those powers accountable, for their dislodgement seems to be an extremely risky career or even life-threatening assignment to embrace. If they cannot capture you, then a well-oiled smear or character assassination machinery would be activated, failing which physical consequences might follow. In case you think my thoughts are wild, go and read Cheryl Atkinson's book, The Smear, which was released March last year. Even if you are a journalist, unconscionable transactional journalists and transactional analysts can be unleashed against you to discredit the good work that you're doing. We seem to have fallen so much in love with money and the self and fame and approval by others, however corrupt they may be, that we have forgotten that many of our compatriots, black and white, have laid their lives down so that we can become the constitutional democracy that we now are, where freedom of the press and freedom of the media is now a reality. We have become so selfish that the ethical standards that define our different professions, the judiciary and the media, are not necessarily espoused by all. Let me continue to read. It follows that the other forces to be confronted are those that maintain or keep alive the stubbornness of poverty, dependencies, poor governance, stagnancy, division, and neocolonialism in South Africa and the rest of Africa, because of the virtually immeasurable benefits they derive from the status quo. Why is it that black and white countries, including Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, were all colonies of the Western powers at some stage, and yet African people or African countries, unlike their white counterparts, are seemingly unable to or incapable of reconnecting with their crime-free, corruption-free, peaceful, stable, proud, and prosperous past? What explains the disconnect between the good distant past and the present backward poverty, crime-ridden present, enabled by maladministration or impunitized poor governance? How many African countries are really free, especially economically? It seems that there are powers with strategies designed to perpetuate neocolonialism and the consequential impoverishment of Africa. And those are the powers that need a courageous and free media to expose and to hold to account. For the sake of the suffering masses of the people of Africa, there should be no untouchables or holy cows here. An article that appears to be of relevance to the whole of Africa was forwarded to me about 2 days ago. It details an angry reaction by a white foreign business executive triggered by a well-to-do Ghanaian man who was begging, typical of an African, begging for an exchange of a seat on a plane. When a fellow passenger confronted their executive about his apparently discourteous tirade, the white brother, who had since cooled down, explained why he hated the very idea that African people continue to beg foreigners even for what is rightfully theirs. He said, I quote, "I've just finished a month-long negotiations with your ministers and government officials over your God-given mineral rights and what my gold mining company should pay. I come to your country, see all this poverty everywhere, with wealth right under your feet. Your own government gives only foreign companies the rights and privileges to rape and steal your country blind. For a few $1,000s, your government officials allow these foreign companies to walk away with A, perpetual tax holidays, B, duty-free imports, C, bloated capital and operational investment costs, D, underdeclared mineral output, E, minimum wages for local employees doing all the work, but fat salaries and expense accounts for foreigners who do almost nothing. F, exaggerated cost of shoddy school blocks and boreholes instead of meaningful royalty to local landowners and communities. G, destruction of local farmlands with pitiful resettlement payments. H, pollution of local drinking water. I, destruction of local infrastructures, etc. My bosses had counseled me at a briefing before my departure. I was asked to read your Osage Yefo, that's Kwame Nkrumah's Neocolonialism. Then I was told, be prepared, and the first to offer the negotiating team a few $1,000s each. Just there. This would explain why I have been so hard on the need for all of us, including the media, to be courageous and free in dealing with corruption in the private sector, just as they are in dealing with and exposing corruption in the public sector. Who was seeking to corrupt these government officials? Somebody in the corporate sector. But let me continue to read. B, a center or a 6-room school block or a few boreholes for the community, and there will be no mention of the usual 10% royalties or an actual government oversight over our operations or adequate resettlement compensations, etc. I did not believe my bosses, since I, a mere high school graduate, was coming to deal with officials with master's and doctorate degrees. Imagine my shock and disappointment when these officials, instead of demanding what is internationally acceptable compensations and royalties for their country and communities, only accepted 3% royalties, and with all kinds of giveaways, and then came to me later begging me to deposit something in their foreign accounts, numbers written on pieces of paper, close quote. Here is the point. There is wealth in South Africa and in Africa, as Lauren Cunningham said, that ought to be benefiting the people of this country. And you and I, who have the privilege of being thought leaders, are in with the possibility to educate our people in business and the broader public that there is enough for everybody. We do not need to cheat communities or government, and government officials don't need to take corruption or bribes in order for all of us to thrive. We need to be focused on serving our people, and especially South Africa, so that we can then become the example that Africa has been waiting for. But I'm not too sure that we spend the kind of quality time that we need to spend on issues that divided us as a nation in the past, with a view to ensuring that a solution is found for them, that we can become a truly united and reconciled nation that we have committed ourselves to becoming. It is our responsibility, we, the courageous and free ones, to pay any price that needs to be paid, so that the promises we all embrace in our Constitution for the people of South Africa can become a practical reality. Allow me to continue to read. I was given 45 minutes. The foreigner went on to explain how companies take minerals of Ghana for next to nothing, deposit huge sums of money in their banks, and turn around to loan the same to the Ghanaian government with ridiculously oppressive conditions. The business executive then went on to ask, which is of great relevance to the media, and please pay attention, I quote, "Has your media asked why the managing directors of the Ghana Chamber of Mines keep defending the mining companies? Or how a Ghanaian working for a Ghanaian British joint company in Ghana and the order of the British Empire, or sir, your media is just as bad, with buffet lunches and dinners and a few cities, that's the currency of Ghana, in their pockets. Your print media become the propaganda machines of these mining companies. They tout the few boreholes and the 6-room schools, but leave out the callous treatment of the local employees and residents and the destruction of the environment. The airwaves are silent on all this. Wacom is the lone voice for the people. Wacom is a community-based human rights and environmental mining advocacy NGO in Ghana. Why don't your media support Wacom by broadcasting and educating the masses, especially the officials, that The United Nations does not approve of a foreign companies robbing the indigenous full benefits of their God-given mineral and oil deposits. I've listened to your new president talking about Ghana beyond aid, and it seems he is the only Ghanaian who has read Osage Yefo's book on neocolonialism. Let's hope he's your messiah, close quote. It is necessary that our media be courageous enough to expose and hold to account all the powers behind business or investment practices similar to those in Ghana and the rest of Africa. The rape and the stealing of Africa's wealth must now come to an end. The corruption and collusion in the corporate sector must be exposed and dealt with very firmly and with the same vigor and persistence as is the case with public sector corruption and its practitioners. The terms under which investors are allowed to do business must be published for public information and comment. Wages paid by mining companies to Africans must be compared by the media to those paid by similarly situated employees in the Western countries. The injustice, exploitation, overt or subtle racism, economic marginalization that Sol Plaatje set out to uproot must be fought relentlessly by our courageous and free media. Africa is divided along religious, colonial, and pigmentational lines. There is a self-serving, indecent emphasis on so-called black and white Africa. Who are the masters of this evil game, and to what end is a divided Africa being pursued? It is important that our media exposes and holds accountable all, but not some powers. The state wields a lot of power, but so do the corporate sector, foreign interests and governments, governing and opposition political parties, and those who set up or own or sustain media houses. And it may not always be easy to undermine the agenda of those who pay you and the interest of those who oil the printing machines, but try we must. All wrongdoers must be exposed. Let me make my point clearer. Not every media house was established with the sole objective of simply receiving and imparting any piece of information that objectively advances the interests of all. As far back as 1791, during the presidency of George Washington, a cabinet minister of his by the name of Thomas Jefferson, who ultimately became the third president of that nation, and one of the founding fathers of the American constitutional democracy, James Madison, who also ultimately became, I think, the fifth president of that nation, colluded, they conspired to undermine the administration of George Washington. And this was the plan. They secretly established a newspaper by the name of the National Gazette. And they obviously couldn't be editors and had to look for an editor. A man by the name of Philip Freneau was approached. Philip said, I'm not interested. Thomas Jefferson had to use government money from the State Department that he was head of to pay a salary to Philip Freneau so that these government resources could be used to undermine the very government in which he was serving. At this early point, what point am I making? Again, not every media outlet or media house exists purely to inform and to impart whatever information might be necessary for taking our people and our nation forward. But it doesn't end there. President Abraham Lincoln, together with his Secretary of State, William Henry Seward, during that war between the South and the North, they sat down and said, the newspapers in the South are failing. How about we buy a larger stake in these newspapers so that we can secretly use the media. Open calls to provide a forum for union men to sway their opinion of fellow Southerners. Close quotes. So those newspapers were going to be courageous and free only if the interest of the North, or the interest of President Abraham Lincoln, whom I revere, by the way, and his regime were not to be undermined. It doesn't end there. How did Fox News Channel come into being? On the 7th of October, 1996. An Australian-born man by the name of Rupert Murdoch and the Republican Party strategist, Roger Ailes, I'm not too sure I'm pronouncing it correctly, decided to counter the media houses like CNN International that they perceived to be beholden to the Democratic Party. So they wanted to set up a media house that would advance a particular cause. Meaning, however good a news item might be, from which the Democratic Party and like-minded people could possibly benefit, it was never going to be allowed to find the light of publicity in that channel. So you just see a news channel of freedom of expression, courageous and free, and assume that we all going to be served and served well, only to find that that is not the objective, that is not the plan. I mean, Saul Plaatje, the first Secretary General of the now African National Congress, in 1981 he set up a newspaper known as Koranta ya Botswana, and in 1910 Tsala ya Batho. But the agenda was very clear. It was to highlight issues of great concern to Africans such as racism, injustice, exploitation, and ultimately after 1913, land restitution. Meaning, if anybody who has a different perspective about these issues were to want to publish an article, I doubt if he or she would have been allowed to publish the article in that news media, because it has a particular agenda to advance. So, I hope that all the media houses in South Africa, all the media outlets, have but one agenda to advance. And that is an understanding that we are a constitutional democracy that is at its adolescence, that we are a nation that was at war with itself for many years, and that some of the critical issues that need to be confronted, or call them powers that need to be confronted, are racism, xenophobia, tribalism. It's not over. Landlessness by the overwhelming majority of people of African descent. And a very slow pace of entering the mainstream economy by the previously disadvantaged. So to avoid being overtaken by events, as it seems to be the case with this land issue now, we all have the responsibility, even if it may not strictly fall within our line of duty, so to speak, to worry about what used to cause our nation to bleed in the past. To make sure that where Nelson Mandela left off in trying to unite us and reconcile us as a nation, we take over in our respective corners and make it our business to unite our people and reconcile them. And that means a realization that until a power known as racism, xenophobia, and tribalism is crushed in a systematic way, our great-grandparents, children, several years down the line, will be fighting the same battles that were fought in the past, because when they think that nothing but political power has been achieved, your guess is as good as mine as to what they are likely to do. There is a power behind the land problem. You and I owe it to posterity to confront that power. Say, but isn't there a solution that is unlikely to divide our people any further? What is it? And whatever power lies behind keeping our people divided because of the land power should then be exposed and held to account, because there is a power behind every serious problem. The same extends to the economy. So, let's confront all these powers. There is a power behind corruption in the public and private sector. I can't repeat enough that South Africa has all we need for all of us to flourish. It is a thing of shame, I often say, that a country like Singapore, which has nothing, is as wealthy as it is compared to South Africa, a city-state. And that South Korea, the size of KwaZulu-Natal, same population as South Africa, is as economically advanced, is more economically advanced than South Africa in circumstances where 25 years ago we were on par. So there are powers to be exposed. There are powers to be held accountable. It will be most unfortunate and myopic of us to think that the only real power to confront in order for South Africa to progress as it should and occupy her rightful place in the family of nations is government. Governments come and go. There was a campaign, a very powerful campaign, against a particular personality. The personality is not there, but where are we? So we dare not be that narrow-minded, but more importantly, we can't afford to be superficial. Let's go deep. What is it that sustains racism? What is it that we can do in our families, at kindergartens, at schools, at work to crush racism? I'm not worried about the racism that flares up in the public domain. It's not as dangerous and progress retarding and as divisive as the subtle and sophisticated racism that you can feel the impact of but never be able to hold. You will never be able to produce evidence that racism is at play here, when in fact it's so effective. I get worried when people want us to begin to define transformation. There's a power to be confronted behind that proposal, that transformation even has to be defined. It's a manifestation of resistance to the much needed change in this country. Subtle racism, polished racism, subconscious prejudice, xenophobia. You become xenophobic and you say, I'm not xenophobic. If you don't go deep, let me just give you an example as I round up. We will, centuries to come, still have women undermined as they are. I was saying to some fellow South Africans that I had a meeting with yesterday, one of them is here yesterday. Why is it that notwithstanding that women are almost always in the majority in any given country, that America has never had a woman president? Why is it that France has never had a woman president? Why is it that Angela Merkel was the first? Why is it that we can only count Margaret Thatcher and Theresa May? Why? Because there was no clear plan, no clear strategy, no people assigned the responsibility to implement that plan and implement it effectively that would ensure that there is gender equality. Was there a woman before Matlazi became chairperson? Oh, I feel better. How many? Why is it? So there is you need a plan. For gender equality, you need a plan to uproot racism. It's not a question of people not being racist in their utterance. Go deep, because it lies at the heart of the problems that we used to have and continue to have. I think I must stop there. Let's go out there, good people. We've got a lot of work to do. As I said, you've done very well, but there is much more that needs to be done. It comes at a price, though. Read that book if you haven't read it, The Smear, by Cheryl Atkinson. You'll see what some of your colleagues could be willing to do to crush you. You'll see what some interest, vested interest, would be willing to do to anybody, even if he is a JF Kennedy, if he doesn't toe the line. There is a price to be paid, and we have examples in abundance in South Africa of people who were willing to pay the price just so that our country, and by extension our continent, could be normal and as prosperous as it was, and even more prosperous than it was before Lord Macaulay came up with his strategy that has been followed with much appetite by like-minded people over the years up until now.
All right, well, unfortunately, that brings us to the end of that interview. Well, so it wasn't an interview, really. It was a speech by the Chief Justice Mogoeng Mogoeng yesterday, and he was delivering the keynote address out at the Net Nakasa Awards late last night. Let's take a quick ad break now. We're starting in no time with a new bulletin.